So, good morning, dear Sangha. Today we are the 8th of December in the year 2024, and we are in the middle, a little bit past the middle of our 90-day Rains retreat, and we are studying our teacher's teachings on how to be a soulmate of the Buddha. So this is something we're studying together. And today I've been requested to share about the Dharma Talk that we watched on Wednesday in the Hamlets, and which is available on YouTube in the playlist for those who just arrived on Friday. And in this Dharma Talk, which is from the 6th of December 2012, Thay said a lot of very interesting things. I think after watching it, I realized I think this is probably one of the top 20 most important Dharma talks our teacher ever gave. So it is worth studying, looking deeply into, and taking time to digest. And today I will share about two lines, from this Dharma talk. And Thay said this: if we want to share the teachings of Buddhism with the West, so that the West can benefit from the insights of Buddhism, we must be very careful. Because if we're not careful, the West will introduce dualism into Buddhism and will denaturalize Buddhism, just as they have denaturalized Christianity. Okay. So there's kind of two theses here. One is that the West has denaturalized Christianity, and that perhaps by learning and understanding how we might have done that, we can avoid the danger of denaturalizing Buddhism. Okay. So, this morning, there's quite some ground to cover. The encounter of Christianity with the West. I will try to share a little bit about this. I did some reading and research so that you don't have to, but so that we can really feel what Thay is saying when he's pointing to this. As we know, our teacher is a scholar, was a scholar, and studied comparative religion at Princeton Theological Seminary and then at Columbia. So when he's saying these things, it's really from a place of understanding and also ongoing dialogue. Many of his closest friends were Christian theologians, priests, and monks of the Christian faith. So when Thay is saying this, he's not saying it lightly. So this morning, I will share with you my journey of understanding what might have happened to Christianity in its encounter with the West, and to see how these tendencies, maybe to be dualistic in our way of relating to spirituality, might inform our paradigm and consciousness today. How today do we sit within a kind of dualistic way of seeing and interacting with the world? And then, hopefully, I will take some time to explore how we can practice and how the Dharma doors and practices of Plum Village can help us transcend that kind of dualism. In our very way of practicing, we can kind of break free from it and truly touch the healing and liberating insights that Buddhism has to offer. And finally, I will share a little bit and expand in a more contemporary way on maybe some ways sort of in society that Buddhism might already be being denaturalized or taken from its true context. Okay, so I should also say, one of the challenges in talking about dualism, as someone who grew up in a Western dualistic context, is that I really find it hard to not be dualistic myself. And we have Sister Langnam in the hall, I believe, somewhere. And I thought I need to give her a kind of bell or buzzer so that every time I'm dualistic, she can make a sound. Okay, she's there. So we can have some kind of signal. But then I thought maybe this could interrupt the flow because it might happen too often. So I'll just share a disclaimer that this is not something that I have transcended myself. I'm using a language that has emerged in a Western dualistic context. Our grammar, our ways of speaking and thinking about things carry this dualism within it. But I will try to be vigilant to this. So this is a work in progress, and I believe this is the first time since Thay first taught or gave this message or this insight. It's the first time we've tried to unpack it in the community in a sort of more detailed way. So this is the start of, in a way, the work of our generation to really understand what Thay was pointing towards and how we can truly embody and carry the authentic insights of Buddhism forward. So, a little moment on the history of Christianity. And I will go through this quite quickly, but this is just to lay the landscape for us to understand what Thay meant when he says the West might have denaturalized Christianity. Oh yes, for the word denaturalized. So, of course nowadays it's used more in terms of like nationality. You can be denaturalized and you lose your citizenship. Here, Thay is using it in a kind of technical way. It could be denatured, like to take away the true nature of something so that it becomes something else. So to remove the essence. So, as we know, Christianity emerged 2,000 years ago within the context of Judaism in what is today modern-day Israel and Palestine. And at that time, that region in the Middle East was under imperial rule, under the Roman Empire. And as over the centuries, starting 100, 150 years after the emergence of Jesus of Nazareth and his teachings, the faith following his teachings began to spread beyond these Jewish roots. And it spread in three directions. It spread south into Africa. It spread east, well, first sort of north into Central Asia and then east along the Silk Road. And it spread sort of north and west into Europe. And that is where it had the sort of, if you like, the deepest encounter with what was then the empire, and the philosophy of that empire that was really defined by Greek philosophy. And what you see over the first centuries of Christianity is everyone trying to explain the teachings of Jesus in these Greco-Roman terms. And even sometimes borrowing the language of the Greeks and the Romans to explain the spiritual message of Jesus of Nazareth. And in so doing, the result was that it absorbed essentially principles from Greek and Roman philosophy. And we will go into a bit what those were, but it's important to understand that as the early teachings of Jesus encountered kind of imperial rule, essentially a spirituality is encountering a system of power. A little bit of a translation problem. There's no more French. Okay. So the spiritual tradition or spiritual teachings of Christianity are encountering an empire that is very concerned with power, with control. Also, an empire or a civilization that has normalized violence. So the teachings of Jesus were very non-violent, and they encountered and ended up being integrated into a logic, a worldview, and a philosophy that had normalized violence and had normalized patriarchy and a lot of other things. And okay, we were 2,000 years ago. We were at the encounter between an empire and a very grounded and simple grassroots spiritual teaching, the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. And his teachings were very straightforward, they were very relational, very egalitarian, and he emphasized many things, the importance of ethical living and living in community, but also the importance of love and repentance, and also the relationality with a very close and warm and intimate God and a kingdom of God that was present and available here on earth in this moment, a kind of sacredness that is there in the human body that everyone can touch, the common people, everyone can touch. And that's really the kind of the essence of early Christianity. And as it encountered kind of what we can call Greek rationalist philosophy, the thought of Plato, of Socrates, and then later scholars, the sort of essence of these core teachings of Jesus were transformed into a sort of doctrinal system that was very abstract. And there were some very key dualisms that really got strengthened, exaggerated, defined. And Thay, in his talk on December the 6th, 2012, he spoke about these, and in many talks he speaks about these, and I'll just write them on the board so we can bear them in mind. One is the strict dualism and division between spirit and matter. Whereas in Jesus' teachings, it's very clear that the divine and the human are interwoven, intertwined, which is sort of linked to a division between soul and body. And the soul being something disembodied and something immortal, which came from the Greek philosophy, the teachings on immortality and a vast, great, perfect divine. And very importantly in theology and for Thay, a difference between the creator, God, and his creation, us, and the miracle of life. Also borrowed from the Greeks, a very clear distinction which comes with this between heaven and earth. There are so many interesting things to say, and I will restrain as much as possible, but one interesting point is that Jesus chose the word kingdom of God. He could have said realm of God, abode of God, but he said kingdom, God's kind of dominion, to bring it down to earth, to show that there can be the sacred in the heart of this world here. Anyway, many books written about this. And this is then linked to another one which is important, which is the difference between the sacred and the profane. And this, over the centuries, through many very important figures in Christianity, the word profane here means flawed. It's even more strong than mundane or ordinary. It means dirty almost. Yeah. Okay. And just a wordplay, because we're talking about the word denaturing or denaturalizing. Essentially what's happening is there's a difference between, I'll put it here, the supernatural or supra and the natural. Okay. Okay. I need to speed up a little bit. So this develops through the centuries. We have thinkers and philosophers like Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century who really crystallized or enhanced this even further. And he also introduced or crystallized this idea that humans are above the kind of lower natural world. So you have a kind of human superiority complex. This dualism opens the door for a human superiority complex. It continues through the centuries. This is getting stronger and stronger. And we're talking about, quote unquote, the West, which also, what does that mean? The dominant intellectual, spiritual, theological tradition prevailing in Europe and where Europe was going. Obviously, primarily the people involved in this were white men, but this is what was happening. And it's not absolute. There are also pockets where there are indigenous spiritualities still surviving, even when Christianity may have been the dominant worldview. Okay. But what's important is when we come to the 17th century and we have Descartes. And Descartes, a very important figure in really taking this to a further level with the mind-body dualism in a very... So we have not only a difference between the soul and the body, but we also then have a difference between the mind and the body, a dualism here. And with this, we start to have the idea that reason is here, specifically in the brain, and we are analyzing an exterior physical world that we can dissect, that is knowable through the rational mind. And as a key figure in kind of establishing the scientific method, Descartes is also saying it's so important to measure everything. So we start to have a society, a collective consciousness where everything needs to be measured. And with this idea, the dualism between the mind and the body is the idea that humans have consciousness, but nothing else or no other beings do. I do want to mention Spinoza, who is coming just a couple of decades after Descartes. And he's a bit of a hero in the tale, because Spinoza was very clear that God is inside God's creation, that the natural world is full of spirit. And there are these two phrases from Spinoza. I don't know if I should write these words on the board. Okay, we are. So you have Spinoza, and you have natura naturans. And natura naturata. So you have this is the manifested world, and this is the God force of vitality, a sort of invisible force acting to create the world. So Spinoza, Thay really appreciated Spinoza. So and Spinoza is really quite close to maybe more holistic view of things. And Spinoza thought that humans were fully integrated, part of the miracle of the natural world. Okay. Some more ground to cover. So, the main thing to take from this, for us, for our spiritual practice, is that some things are happening as a result of this in our collective consciousness. The devaluation of nature, alienation from the body, and I don't know what to call this one, but it's something like the dream of heaven and an afterlife. What is very important in what ended up happening by the time we get to Descartes is that the divine, the sacred, and God gets more and more reduced. So at the time of Jesus, God is present in every stone, in every piece of wood, in every human being, in God's creation. But by the time we get to Descartes and then the scientific materialistic paradigm, which we will come to, God has been reduced. First by the Greeks, God becomes something very distant, very abstract, very pure, completely immortal, far away in the sky. God is no longer close and knowable to us. Very distant. And then, with the steps from Descartes and the kind of scientific paradigm, God's domain is reduced even further to some completely sort of imaginary power, pure, immortal power, very far away. And by taking God out of nature, it means that as sort of society, as people, as humans, we're no longer relating to the natural world as though it's sacred. From what they call an enchanted world, like our ancestors lived in an enchanted world. Everything was alive. The rivers were alive. The forests were alive. Mother Earth was alive. There was magic and mystery and huge reverence for creation. But unfortunately, with the impact of Christianity, that sort of sacredness and divinity is banished from creation, and then that's what leads then to the extractive, exploitative actions we have then done to the earth. In Christianity, there are some forms that merged with local indigenous traditions in Africa and also here in Europe, where we have a very interesting Christianity in the Celtic regions, and we can see the Celtic earth earth religions really connecting with Christianity. And there are still today poems and prayers that are preserved where you can see how enchanted the natural world was for Celtic Christians. And some of these poems and prayers that are really earth-connected, they were still being recited by people right up until about 150 years ago, when they started to be collected and written down. And I say this because Thay also said that part of our mission is to go return to the roots of Christianity and to restore the non-duality that is there in our Christian roots. And there is a wonderful poem that I learned from Celtic Christianity, which is about the moon. And so in the past, our ancestors, just like we have meditation poems that we call gathas here in the monastery, our ancestors also had poems that they learned by heart for every time they encountered the natural world, every time they set off on a journey, every time they milked the cow, every time they lit their fire. And I really loved the poem for the moon. And it goes something like this: as soon as you see the moon, so in the night sky, when you see the moon, you say, I lift to thee my eyes, I bow to thee my head, I send to thee my love, thou glorious jewel of all ages. I lift to thee my eyes, I bow to thee my head, I send to thee my love, thou glorious jewel of all ages. So we know that we can interact with the moon like that. And I invite you to try it. I practice this gatha with the moon, and I find it very enriching. So there are many ways that we can see the sacredness in our environment, in the natural world around us. A comment on alienation from the body. We may have inherited from this worldview a sense of guilt and shame towards our body that is there in the dominant thought and paradigm of this dualistic worldview. And that may be an obstacle for us when we come to practice Buddhism. In terms of the dream of heaven and the afterlife, this has entered our collective consciousness as a deep sense that this moment is not all there is, that there is something better later. That this moment is mundane, this moment is normal, this moment is fallen. The earth is fallen, and humans, we are fallen. This is the idea of sin that is also introduced in Christian dualism. And that may get in the way of us seeing the miracle of the present moment. It may be a very subtle sense that there is something more later that we can't quite put our finger on, that prevents us from seeing the fullness, magic and mystery of this moment. Oh la la. Okay. So what is happening here? And Thay said there are two very human tendencies that are going on here. The first is to believe in an immortal soul. And the second is to believe in a higher power. or God. Yeah. And in the series of teachings we've been watching and studying this Rains Retreat, we've been learning that these tendencies were also there in India at the time of the Buddha. There was also a tendency to want to believe in a soul that reincarnates, a soul that is unchanging and eternal, and to delegate responsibility to kind of gods, to feel that there are gods in charge of our life, it's not us. And that's a very interesting question, why we have as humans this tendency to want to believe in higher powers, because maybe it's too confronting to think that we do have loads of agency, that we could be responsible for our actions, and we would like to outsource, to delegate that. So here in this hall, I don't know how many of us identify either as Christians or can see ourselves in some of this landscape of consciousness that we're surrounded by here in the West. I mean, some of us might be sitting here thinking, this doesn't apply to me. I'm a clear-thinking individual. And one of the things about this paradigm, especially because of the Descartes step and the scientific materialist step, is that we think we're free-thinking individuals who are freely choosing and separate from the collective consciousness around us. So, to say a little bit more about that, okay, so we need to add into the pot scientific materialism. Which has utterly shaped our society, our culture, and our education here in the West. And this leads to a sense that it's building on everything that Descartes kind of opened up. It's that only the physical world is real, only the measurable world is real. And there are scholars who say, through the door of Descartes and then the rise of scientific materialism, that is how we can get to a point where we've reduced, through this whole journey, we reduced God, made God so far away and so small, opened the door to scientific materialism, and then God is something that can be deleted. And then we have nihilism. So we go from the extreme of eternalism to the extreme of nihilism. And scientific materialism is telling us that we live in a dead universe. But it was very interesting when we had the science retreat in 2012. We had an astrophysicist here who had a little bit of a dialogue with Thay. And it was only at the end of the dialogue, when they were talking about the origin of the world, he then just said, well, that's God. So somehow, some people manage to, they leave micro percent of the dead, nihilistic, materialistic worldview, and then God is still hiding as a final or first course. Okay. According to Brother Fablin. So I prepared for this Dharma talk by having a lot of conversations with different monastics, so you're all in this Dharma talk. According to Brother Fablin, the scientific materialistic world paradigm makes a non-dual experience of the world impossible. If we're still inside the scientific materialistic paradigm, we will not be able to allow ourselves to touch the insight of interbeing, to experience a truly non-dual way of relating. And partly it's because of this thing that everything must be measured. So, for example, we might be coming on this retreat and we might already be having a metric of measuring our experience of the retreat. How am I doing according to what I thought I would come to learn? How can I optimize the retreat to have the things that I want to touch? And so that measuring frame is creeping in to everything. And it's also telling us that there are things that are knowable and things that can't be proven. So we then have this sort of burden of proof that if our heart is moved by a sunset, science can't measure that. If we have a really deep encounter with a tree, we might even doubt ourselves because it's not measurable, and we may invalidate these deeper experiences. And I'll just give one example from a kind of scientific materialistic paradigm. We had a neuroscience retreat here in 2019, and as part of the 5 days, we had a dialogue with them in the transformation hall and then a kind of question and answer. And one of the female neuroscientists asked a question, and she said, "Yeah, but have you ever identified a feeling that didn't originate in your mind?" So she's very much here. She was like, that can arise from the body and not from the mind. And I had like a real shock moment. And then I thought, well, what can I share with you? So then I said, well, as a woman, I have a monthly cycle, and every month my body experiences some really profound things. And it took me quite some time of practice to finally identify that the feeling I had a few days before my cycle was a profound feeling of grief and sadness. And I explained to her that I was very happy when I had this insight, because I tended to think that I was sad about what was happening around me, or that my mind was sad, or that I was in grief or tension with whatever was happening. But actually there was a struggle going on at the cellular level of my body, and grief was coming from the cellular level of my body. The woman, she was just smiling from ear to ear, and I'm sure many of the women here in this hall. We have our embodied, lived, direct experience, and we don't need science to measure and tell us about how we're experiencing the world. And this is a very important element of our Buddhist practice, which is it's an embodied practice, and we are learning from and listening to our body. So, the whole point about why I'm mapping this out today and why Thay wanted us to contemplate this is as practitioners, and for the monastics, as lineage holders of the Buddhist tradition, we need to be so vigilant to ensure that we don't remove some of the essences of the heart of Buddhist teaching that can really bring healing and liberation and help us free ourselves from these two tendencies, to believe in an immortal soul, to believe in a higher power, but also have real healing. So the freedom of Buddhism is freedom from our afflictions. And this is the healing. And freedom from our wrong views. Or we could say knowledge. Mistaken knowledge. And so to be a true soulmate of the Buddha, we want to have a kind of practice that sets us free from our wrong views, that we don't fall into any of these tendencies of believing in an immortal soul or a higher power, and that we don't fall into dualism so that we can truly touch healing. I have a great quote here from Sister Langnam. I said, where's the freedom in touching the insight of no self? I said, that sounds like hard work. And she said, the freedom is that you're not spending too much energy upholding something that's not there. Okay. A little bit of Sister Langnam in the talk. Okay. Now, some of you may be looking at this and thinking, okay, right now, please give me some concrete, measurable criteria so I can make sure that I don't denaturalize Buddhism in my practice. Okay. Hello, you are welcome. So I was here in 2012. I was a few years into my monastic life when Thay was giving these teachings. And there was one morning when I woke up. We were living in the Plum Hill building in the Lower Hamlet. And I can't describe it, but I stepped outside and God was gone. This, I can't describe the feeling of it except for that. And there was the only line in my journal that day. I woke up this morning and God was gone. And I'm someone who grew up in a Christian tradition. I went even to a Christian school. I think I come from many generations of faith and spiritual practice. And had I just killed God? Like, what would God say if he knew I'd killed him? So there was a whole thing for me of, have I just made a wasteland of my soul? My soul. But then I thought, oh no, I should be very happy with this. This is the success of my Buddhist practice. Finally, I have banished God. I've made it. I've become a true Buddhist. But it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like that. Because actually, I mean, now I can say this, there was still dualism in it. Because I had made God into a thing separate from me that I had then deleted or declared to be deleted. Whereas actually, God or the ultimate is kind of everywhere and all around me. But I didn't know this at the time. I just thought God was gone. And my life is colder for it. I'll just say colder for it. And at that time, Thay was teaching about falling in love with the earth and seeing the earth as living matter, not living spirit, not inert matter. And so he had given us the challenge that every walking meditation, we have to walk as though we are walking on a living earth, on living spirit. And honestly, I swear, when you do this, like, first of all, one thing that happens, your steps become much lighter. And Thay said we have to train ourselves. So it's something that takes training, because for a couple of millennia, this is not how we have walked on the earth. And it's very interesting, because in Lower Hamlet at that time, we still walked along the road. And I was like, oh, this would be so much easier if we weren't walking along tarmac. Okay. Are we going to say that the tarmac is inert, but the earth isn't? So you see the dualism, it just comes in, like you can't stop it. So it's a training to keep coming back, keep coming back. The world is alive, the world is enchanted. Everything around me, all phenomena are full of life and mystery. And in the science retreat in 2012, Thay spoke a lot about the sort of mysteries at the different levels of the cosmos. So we have the infinitely big, but also the infinitely small. And even an atom, I don't know all the right words, proton, all these things, they're very mysterious. They are not understood. There is a kind of a mystery and a level of knowing at even the sort of smallest, whatever that thing is. Smallest particle, thank you. I want to use all the right words. The smallest particle has its intelligence, has its mystery. And Thay used to love using the phrase that, every grain of corn, like popcorn, every grain of corn has its way of knowing. It knows how to make a plant of corn. Every acorn, every tree, it has its way of knowing, it has its way of being and becoming. And for me, in that winter of 2012, 2013, I took refuge a lot in the oak trees of Lower Hamlet. And the oak trees really became part of my consciousness, my spiritual landscape. And I don't think Lower Hamlet would be a different Hamlet without these two great oak trees, just as Upper Hamlet would be different without the pine tree by the Buddha or without the linden tree. And one thing I discovered in being here in Plum Village is that it's one thing to intellectually know that the natural world is a miracle and a wonder. But it's quite different to take the time to be in silence with the natural world and to pay attention to what it is telling us in the silence. And I remember this was a few years before that, I was here as a long term, and I went home for Christmas, as some of you will be doing. And the departure day was the 21st of December. And I was sitting out waiting for the van to go to the train station. And I just heard this little sound. I have to do it. I have to do it. And it was a completely silent morning. And there was this sound. And I turned around, and the oak leaves were covered in frost. And they were just falling, duk, 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 one by one, onto the frosty ground and just making the most beautiful sound. And I was like, 21st of December, like the day the oak tree is releasing its leaves. Like that was an event. That was an event for the oak tree, but it was happening entirely in silence. And I sat there for, it must have been about 20 minutes, witnessing the oak having its experience of that cold, peaceful morning where it was just letting go so peacefully. And I will say, the oak tree was having an experience, was radiating and expressing its experience. Did it have feelings? What was its consciousness? Like, how would it feel to be a tree letting go of all your leaves in that morning? And I thought, why have I never noticed this before? So I think there was a very rare set of causes and conditions that led to the releasing of the leaves that morning. And I give this example because I think our mind projects so much onto our lived world that we're not really listening to the diverse experience of the more than human world around us. Because science tells us it's not important. Science tells us that a tree is just there, it's like furniture, can become furniture, it's there to be cut down, it just is. But we don't think of the trees in living dialogue with everything that's happening. We've just had some beautiful autumn weeks, and the maple trees have been a beautiful reds and gold, and the oaks have been a beautiful burnished gold. And I always like to, for some reason the phrase always comes to me, they're singing their song of autumn in silence. It's like they're singing a song. It's so radiant, but it's a silent song. But that's their moment. You know, there's something really going on for the tree in that moment, just like in spring with the blossom. It is also a kind of song, a delight of the tree. So, kind of one question I would have for us on this non-dualism of interacting with the natural world is to ask ourselves, can we see the sacredness all around us? Can we allow the natural world, can we allow, well, we can say, if you like the Buddhist way, the objects of our perception to be deeply alive, deeply sacred, deeply conscious, deeply mysterious? And Thay used the phrase that in a different talk, he said, one of the problems in the West is that we have put God in the wrong place. We have put God in the wrong place. So we put him up in the sky and then so far away, and then finally we let him go. But to put God where Spinoza put God, in every living thing, God here being the ultimate, being what is sacred, what is beyond words. I have to be so careful in what I say. We haven't had many signs from Sister Langnam, but she's just biting her tongue. And a further point on how we can transcend this dualism around consciousness. Like, so we might say the material world is not consciousness, or our mind is not consciousness, this idea that consciousness is only in the brain. And this is a kind of dualism that all of us can transcend every day in our lived attentiveness to our whole body. And in Buddhism we speak about mindfulness of the body from within the body. It's not that the mind comes out and then says, oh yes, I know I have arms, I can see my arms, I know I've got my body, and intellectually experiences the body. But we can train ourselves to become aware of our body from within the body. And we know from modern biology, so science is sometimes helpful, that our body is, is sending a lot of signals. So part of biology knows that our body is sending a lot of signals, but also, we might then think to the brain, but there are some functions of the body that are taking place even without time to go up to the brain and back again. So this is like fields of research at the moment might be measuring where consciousness is happening. But we could just free ourselves from that immediately, which is saying we don't need to outsource our consciousness to whether a scientist has or has not proved something. In our own practice of walking meditation, we can feel the earth with our feet. We can awaken all the awareness and consciousness in our legs, in the soles of our feet, in like the experience of gravity through the whole body. And our body can have a full kind of conscious mindfulness of every step we are taking on this beautiful planet. So it's not that our mind is doing walking meditation, but allow every cell of our body to do walking meditation. And I want to mention here that not only did this dualistic worldview encounter scientific materialism, it has also encountered capitalist individualism. And so when we are wanting to be a true soulmate of the Buddha, truly penetrate the teachings on no self, truly touch the insight of interbeing, we are doing so within a capitalist, we could say hyper-individualistic society. And this is affecting everything, so many countless causes and conditions before we even come to our spiritual practice of mindfulness and Buddhism. It is affecting, for example, how we all relate to time. There was a big shift in society about from being a very religious societies towards what they now call a more secular society. And so religions were just part of life. Spiritual practices were part of life. And then at some point they became an optional choice. And so how can we, rediscover time outside of time, so that when we are investing time in our spiritual practice, see, I use the word investing, when we are choosing, you see, very capitalistic, we choose everything, and we choose how we will spend our time, rather than spirituality being a part of our life, and our economic activity being kind of secondary, actually, to our spiritual dimension. But now it's the other way around. Our economic activity is the dominant part of our life, and then we opt in to spirituality, that then it's now this era of like absolute choice. So then it's a different relationship to our spirituality when we are actively choosing it by some measurable criteria. And that may get in the way of a really natural, kind of authentic, direct experience of spiritual practice and connection with ourselves and the mystery of life. I love the work of the author Ursula Le Guin, and she has a fantastic book called The Telling, and in this book, citizens are known as producer-consumers. And does our production and our consumption kind of define us? And how to relate in a way that is beyond producing and consuming. There's a word like, because of the infinite choice we have in our society, and not just like the supermarket and not just what channels you open on the screens, but like sort of everything is chosen. And then we're trying to customize our life experience. And we might even plan our years and our time, tailor-made for us. And these are all ways in which we are, we are somehow consuming our life, our time, and our choices. And then we want to optimize. So we want to optimize our retreats. We want to optimize even the present moment. I mean, it's a huge demand on the present moment. The present moment must set us free. The present moment must be a gateway to all of these things. And that is because we haven't yet sort of freed ourselves to have a kind of denatured, direct experience, especially in relation to time and to the present moment. How can we give the present moment a lot more space? I was going to say a lot more value. So this is one of our challenges as children of this age, children of this collective consciousness. And in combination really with the scientific paradigm also, there may be practices that we kind of decide, oh, that practice is not for me. And I know that there are a few folks, I mean, often it's very interesting, it comes up around the bowing and especially around the touching the earth. And we might say, yeah, I opt out of that one. So this is a problem because we are coming to a practice with a certain measurable frame. Like, for example, with that is, I can still have a great and deep and powerful experience without that practice, right? So we're extracting or we're taking out certain elements and we're saying, I as my discerning, rational self, don't need that for my liberation. And there's a story from India, from the Indian tradition, where they speak about a grain of salt that wanted to know how salty the ocean is. And in order to know, the grain of salt has to jump into the ocean. And there are quite a few practices in the Buddhist tradition that we can describe as, I think the technical term is kind of as if rituals, that we train our body to do the action, even though our mind hasn't intellectually clicked subscribe, follow. Sorry, it just came to me. Even though our mind hasn't fully understood a practice, we still follow the form of the practice. And actually, this is what happened to me with the practice of touching the earth. Some people might know it as like the full body prostrations. And in Plum Village, we do them with wonderful contemplations of all sorts of different kinds. Sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. And I will never forget being in the Dharma Nectar Hall, when that was our big meditation hall of Lower Hamlet. And it was in the position of touching the earth, I was then like, something is happening. And also it was, there is a remembering here. There is a remembering. And I was like, oh, and then this feels good. So there are some things, that is an insight coming from the body, we can say, not from the mind. There are some things we need to do, we co-manifest them. There's an interdependent co-arising between our consciousness and that practice, and we have to place ourselves in it in order to get the fruit and the insight that that practice is offering. We can't stand as the neutral outside observer and say, I'll jump in when I see that it works. Very interesting. One more story about no self. So, in all of these dualisms, the soul with the body, or the mind and the body, we are, and in our capitalist individualistic society, we're very sure that we are a separate self, because that is, I think Brother Spirit gave me the term, that's our consensus reality. That society is made of individuals. And so it's quite a challenge for each of us to find what will be the practices, the Dharma doors, to kind of unlock and break free from our sense of being a separate self. And actually, for me, it kind of had a weird upside-down pathway, because a few years into my novicehood, I realized that everyone kept on talking about self-compassion and the importance of tenderness and compassion, especially in sitting meditation. And at some point, a couple of years in, I realized I have absolutely no compassion for myself. Absolutely none. And I was fighting against it on the cushion. I'm not lovable. I can't accept myself. I am, I was going to say, a stupid little girl, and that tells you something. So I had internal dialogue, but a real inability to be at peace in my body, in my feelings, in my 5 skandhas, if you like. And so it was in order to be able to kind of make peace with myself, and we had lazy days, and so I don't know how I managed it as a novice, but I managed to have some time in one of the huts in Lower Hamlet, and I set myself the mission, okay, in these 10 days, I will not leave the hut until I've been able to have compassion for myself. I mean, it's just terrible. And I think also what's very interesting, I think it was also connected, and I'll just say this as a woman, because in this dualistic worldview, the body is considered carnal and corrupt and all of these things, and especially for women, there's a real gendering there, not to mention multiple genders. And so there was something there that I just felt my body was not a miracle of life and a wonder, as we were training to see it in the different sitting meditations. So I practiced and I practiced. I did everything I could: walking meditation, sitting meditation, metta meditation, touching the earth. And finally, with immense pressure, I broke through to something that I was satisfied with. I was like, okay, I can love myself because I am made of non-me elements. I was so proud of myself. I was like, I did it! I broke through! I'm lovable because I'm not me. And I was so happy with it, so I wrote Thay a letter, and I said, look at my insight, And I think he's probably like, okay, keep going, my child. Like, part way there. But I think also there's something in this, because I was sort of, so one, it was I was seeing the natural world in my body, and I love nature, I love trees, I love the planet, I love all the diverse wonders of evolution and life. So there was, part of it was that, and also part of it was touching my ancestors in my body. And I say this because, especially in the Plum Village Buddhist tradition, this kind of more like linear in time way to unlock no self through getting in touch with our ancestors, our parents, our grandparents, and then more generations, is such an important door to unlock a much vaster sense of self. And it is a lifelong journey, because the ancestors we're closest to are our father and mother, and how they show up in us is complex. I have had, I was going to say more success, but it's not true. I have had success, capitalistic word, just. I have had some fruitfulness, especially with my practice with grandparents. And I had a really moving insight a few days ago. So I work in an office that's a little bit far from the sisters' residence and dining hall, so I do my best to practice walking meditation in this distance. And I try to let go of whatever work or service or headaches I was in by the time I get to the bridge. Some of you know, from the car park to the bridge. By the time I get to the bridge, I try to let go of my work, and then really, from the bridge onwards, really present in every step. And the other day, as I stepped onto the bridge, and I was doing my best to let go of the headaches that I had been carrying, doing some problem solving for the Sangha. And this wish came up. It's like, if only I could have. And it was, I'm trying to find, because it was non-verbal, so I don't really have words for it, but I'm going to say bottle of liquor, just to make it clear. It's like, I could just down a bottle of liquor. That was the feeling, that it was non-verbal. And I've spoken about this before, so I haven't touched liquor since I've been a monastic, just to be clear. But I have spoken about the presence of my grandmother in me, my grandmother who suffered from alcoholism. And it sometimes happens that she comes up in this way. Well, it took me a while to identify that it was her. And when she appears in these moments seeking oblivion from a world of troubles, I have a practice now where I sort of greet her. Well, at the beginning it was like, it's you. Like it was a bit stronger. I was a few days ago, I was really happy because the thought came up. My mindfulness was right there. And I just went, hi, Grandma. This is a grandmother I've never met. She died before I was born. And this was the first time that there was compassion, total compassion and non-judgment. Hello, Grandma. And it was a lovely moment. And I just suddenly felt I was meeting her for the first time. And I was meeting her as a young woman. And I'm a young woman. And it was wonderful. And then, from there to through the poplar grove, there was an encounter of me, like embracing my grandmother in all of her being. And I think it was healing for her and healing for me. Okay. Yes. I will not move on. Let us breathe with this, with the sound of the bell for all our grandparents in us. So I'd just like to finish with some words about how Buddhism might already be being denaturalized in the way that it is radiating out into our contemporary modern world in an encounter with our capitalistic, individualistic, materialistic, industrialized societies. So Thay, in the talk on December the 6th, 2012, he mentioned a few ways. In particular, he said that we should not instrumentalize mindfulness. And what Thay means is you use mindfulness as a tool to get something. Now, I realize I've slipped into the word mindfulness from the word Buddhism, which is in itself interesting. And we will get to that in a moment. But we could instrumentalize either of them. And the image Thay drew on the board was, he thinks, this is myself, I. You think you're here, and then you want to use mindfulness or Buddhism to get something. For example, more success, like to optimize your presence and concentration at work so you can be a more successful individual. So you might put yourself here, and you might put success here, and then you use mindfulness or Buddhism. And here you've made all of them into a thing. We're thinking that we're a fixed self, that we're getting a success and outcome, and then we're going to use mindfulness to do that. Whereas, a bit like the grain of salt jumping into the ocean, by practicing mindfulness, we might change even our idea of who we are, or our idea of what we want. And we may actually then realize, in fact, we don't want success, we want happiness, or we want freedom. So there is a dynamic involved, which when we truly practice a kind of embodied mindfulness, which is not the case when we're instrumentalizing it. And other examples Thay gave is, to make more money, or even when mindfulness is being introduced into schools, sometimes it's to optimize students' performance. So the scientific measurements are to show that it makes the children perform better by these other scientific measures. Whereas for us, when we speak in Plum Village of bringing mindfulness into schools, it's to make the classroom, in Thay's language, a second home, so that the class can be a true community where people can be present and show up as themselves, where children who have difficulty at home can feel heard by their peers and by their teachers. For the classrooms to be a place where we learn about how to relax the body, how to handle strong emotions, how to listen deeply. So our a not denaturalized way of bringing mindfulness to a certain setting is to not have these measurable outcomes of success, and using mindfulness as a way to get there. Sometimes Thay says, mindfulness is a path, not a tool. Okay. I want to mention something here about, okay, no, we will continue. So another word that Thay used on the 6th of December is that we may dilute Buddhism. To remove key teachings or practices. And this we might see in particular with the encounter with Western psychology. There may be a tendency to kind of cherry pick certain aspects of Buddhist psychology and bring them into a dualistic Western psychological frame. And if we dilute the teaching, then it can't be transmitted to future generations. Another word is to extract. And in particular, Thay said we shouldn't extract mindfulness from its ethical context of the Eightfold Noble Path. So mindfulness is just one part of the broader Buddhist teaching. And this becomes important because, for example, there are people who are bringing mindfulness into military settings. So teachings from Buddhism are extracted, diluted, of course, instrumentalized in order to make soldiers better killers. Now, actually, if that is happening, we would say that what they are learning is not actually what we would call mindfulness. So we would have maybe a distinction between right or full mindfulness and a kind of extracted wrong mindfulness. Also, mindfulness and Buddhism are already being appropriated. To sort of become property, appropriated, taken out of the spiritual context, put into apps to make large profits, and then sometimes the apps have huge research budgets to then prove that mindfulness. But I don't want to say here that what if a little bit of mindfulness can help people? So, isn't that okay? Like maybe some people, they can't handle the whole teaching, but maybe a little bit of mindfulness can help. Or maybe we say we have to dilute it because it's skillful means. So, you know, if we mention the Buddha or Buddhism, if we use those words, people won't be able to access the insight of the Dharma. So we kind of say that we need to do it, even using Buddhist language, like it's an appropriate means to help people suffer less. So these are now Sister Langnium's insights on this. It is true that Buddhism has always used skillful means, and it is also true that Buddhism has adapted with every culture that Buddhism has expanded into. And it is also true that Thay said to us, the teachings need to evolve and adapt and stay relevant to our times. So some change is kind of inherent. And the challenge for us, especially those of us as teachers, is how to do so without removing the essence, the true nature of mindfulness or Buddhism. How to be brave, but also vigilant. And how to do so always with kind of insight. And Thay himself said that Buddhism is only made of non-Buddhism elements. And he also said once when a little child in the UK asked him, Thay, do you have any kind of precious thing that you have been able to let go of? Because they'd been learning the story about letting go of your cows, which is a long story. Thay took some time to breathe, and then he said, yeah, I've let go of my idea of Buddhism. I am free. Thay is very happy that the thing he was most proud of letting go is I'm now free of Buddhism. Maybe Buddhism the sign, but not Buddhism the essence. And Thay has also said that we don't need to call ourselves a Buddhist to practice. Okay. But still, we must be vigilant, not to make it mindfulness or Buddhism into a tool, not to dilute it, especially those of us who are transmitters, not to extract, to appropriate it, or to let ourselves be appropriated to other ends. An interesting story, when Thay was invited to Thay and Sister Chan Kong invited to the Vatican in 2014, and they sent a bishop here to invite us to go and to deliver the invitation in person to meet the Pope and participate in an event. And Thay said no. And then he said no and no. And I didn't want to give up. So I kept trying. And then Sister Chan Kong sat with me, I remember, on the bell tower trying to explain why Thay was saying no. And there's a long history of the Christian world appropriating and mistreating Buddhism, especially in Vietnam. But I didn't want to give up because I thought it would be fantastic if Thay and the Pope met. So I created a whole dossier briefing, and then we went, and Sister Gina and I went and interrupted Thay in his hermitage when he was lying on his hammock. And I said, "Oh, Thay, I'm here to talk about the Vatican invitation." He said, "No, no, 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 no." No, no, 7 times. I was like, no, but look at my document. Look at all of these things. This is why we need to. Anyway, and I didn't give up. And it went on and on and on. And it went on for a number of weeks. And I felt, I don't know where it came from in me, such a wish to make this happen. And finally, it was when we were at the EIAB, and then we were a group of us coming. And we had gone back to the Vatican, and we'd said, you've got to try and make it work better, because Thay has said we don't do photo opportunities. They just want us there for the shaved heads and the robes to be in a photo to sign a document. But we actually want to offer our practice, and especially as a monastic community, to offer our practices to the Catholic monastic community. So then we came up with a new proposal, and I negotiated with the bishop, and I was like, the only way this is going to happen is the day before the event, we have to have a whole day of mindfulness in the Vatican. And this was quite hard with the bishop, but it was interesting because he came from the Faculty of Sciences, and so we got in through the science door, skillful means, and we created an event for everyone involved in that topic, which is actually to end modern slavery and human trafficking. Everyone involved, including the religious orders involved in that around the world, to have a day of mindfulness and Dharma sharing together, and relaxation and walking meditation right in the heart of the Vatican, so that we would then participate in the event. And that really, I learned a lot from that experience of Thay's freedom in not letting us be appropriated without a true reciprocal kind of exchange and a meaningful way for us to show up with all of our Buddhism, not just the outer form, but to really bring our heart, our practice, and our worldview to the dialogue and the interaction. I'm aware that I have run out of time. Okay, I will just finish with one thing, which I think some of the translators might have. So I would like to read a quote from Schrödinger, a scientist, that Thay included in his book, The Sun, My Heart. And I love this. It's a very vivid quote. And it's also an invitation for all of us to help us transcend our dualism and get in touch with the living, sacred, and enchanted natural world. Thus, you can throw yourself flat on the ground, stretched out upon Mother Earth, with the certain conviction that you are one with her and she with you. You are as firmly established, as invulnerable as she, indeed 1,000 times firmer and more invulnerable. As surely she, Mother Earth, will engulf you tomorrow, so surely will she bring you forth anew to new striving and suffering. And not merely someday, later, now, today, every day, she is bringing you forth, not once, but thousands upon thousands of times, just as every day she engulfs you 1,000 times over. For eternally and always, there is only now, one and the same now. The present is the only thing that has no end. And in the later years of Thay's teachings, he said, we don't need to put our faith or our refuge in something far away, something hard to grasp, but we can take refuge in the earth herself, the living earth, as a sacred realm, and us as miracles of life that are truly one with this beautiful planet, with this manifestation of cosmos all around us. Thank you for listening.